Hello, good morning. Lovely to see your face on video, Patricia, my friend. Let's get this going. We are so excited to hear this fabulous, have this fabulous woman and colleague and friend here to facilitate this workshop. Uh, I can't imagine many people not knowing who you are, uh, but this is the award-winning author of numerous books, including many, many novels that are just yummy and moving and life-shaping. Workshop leader, imprint leader, owner, a publisher. You can talk about that. And most importantly, perhaps the author of the now available ebook, writing and publishing qualitative research, which seemed apt to mention here. And I don't want to take any time away here, so let's just hand this right over to our facilitator, Dr. Patricia Leavy.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith, and thank you to you and Tony and Carolyn for everything you do to put this on every year. I know it's a lot of work, and we appreciate it. I did actually pop in the top of the chat box. I did sort of surprise drop a new book yesterday on writing and publishing qualitative research. The ebook is out now. The paperback is available for pre-order, but the link is there. I also wanted to let people know, for those of you who are really interested in writing fiction, that by fluke, I'm actually teaching a workshop this month, every Monday in March, called Writing Fiction, Transforming Your Research and Personal Experiences into Fiction. The class is actually already filled, but I asked them to open up a few more spots in case any of you wanted to join. So if you do, the link for that, where you can learn more about it, is there. Eventbrite has been like a little glitchy lately. So if you do want to learn more or register, you're better off cutting and pasting the link versus just clicking on it. We've just seen lots of glitches. But anyway, so I did want to start by acknowledging that today is the first day of Women's History Month. So I would like to acknowledge the countless women who have contributed to my career as a novelist. Most of the people I've worked with in the publishing industry, including publishers, editors, project managers, copy editors, proofreaders, typesetters, cover artists, have been women. The publicists and marketing professionals I've worked with since my debut novel have almost exclusively been women. The vast majority of the book bloggers, book critics, Instagrammers, podcasters, interviewers, and others who have brought attention to my books have been women. And finally, most of my readers, the people who actually buy my novels, have been women. So I just want to acknowledge today that I am grateful to all the women who have helped make it possible for me to spend my life doing the thing that I love most in the world, which is something that I'm really excited to talk with all of you about today. So Carolyn, Tony, and Keith invited me to sort of talk about my career in fiction. And there's only so much you can talk about in a short time, and I wanted to do it in a way that would hopefully be useful to those of you who are or are interested in writing and publishing fiction. So I decided to break down my remarks into sort of three areas. So I'm going to talk about inspiration. So where do I get inspiration for my novels in the hopes that it might trigger you, and how you get inspiration. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the difference between being a writer and being an author, which I just think is fundamental to understand if you want to publish and put your creative work out there. And then in the final section of my remarks, I'm just going to give you some of what I think are my best tips, advice that I wish I had gotten along the way. And then my hope is that we'll open it up for discussion, because I always find people usually come with questions or comments or things that you'd like to discuss. So that's sort of my plan. So if you could save your remarks for the end, there will definitely be time for us to have a discussion. So in terms of the inspiration for my novels, my research and life experiences have sparked ideas that work their way into my fiction in lots of different ways. So the creative process never happens the same way twice. And that is still why I'm completely in love with writing, which I am. You are not going to meet someone who loves writing more than I do. Maybe people who love it as much as I do, but definitely not more. I write 365 days a year. Last year it was 363 days, but that's only because I was literally in the emergency room having surgery for 2 days. So I love writing fiction, even though sometimes it's actually incredibly difficult and painful and demoralizing, but other times it isn't. So I truly love it. So I just want to give you a few examples of how I got the ideas for my novels and how my personal experiences and my research inform those novels in different ways. So I'm going to start with my debut, Low Fat Love. This is actually a 10th anniversary edition that we put out. I wanted to rewrite it, honestly. I wanted to reclaim it and I wanted to do a better job. And so I put out a 10th anniversary edition. But Low Fat Love was my debut novel. And it's really, the novel is really about women who are attracted to people who withhold their support, women who engage in toxic relationships, and sort of the self-esteem issues that go along with all of that. And how it's difficult to have a healthy relationship with anyone else if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. So the inspiration for that novel was that I had been doing interview research for about 10 years, mostly with women and girls, but some men as well, about their relationships, identities, self-esteem, pop culture, all that sort of stuff. And there were always things I wanted to say to them that are not appropriate to say in an interview, something you might say to your friend if they were telling you about their relationship, but you can't really say when you're the interviewer. You can't necessarily give that kind of life advice. And so frustration just built over the years because I was hearing a lot of the same things over and over again. And at the same time, I was going through my own toxic relationships and unhealthy relationship patterns. And I developed feelings and insights about those over time, as one does when you start to see patterns in your life. And I also had many friends that were in what I would consider toxic or dysfunctional relationships. And so I had feelings about those. And so all of those cumulative insights from my research and my teaching as well, the things students would say in class, and my own personal experiences sparked the idea for that novel. And if you read it, I mean, it's all composite characters. So none of the people who informed it would even recognize themselves, but those were the cumulative insights that sort of shaped that novel. So then to flip ahead to a different book and completely different experience, my novel Spark. 9 years ago, I got the coolest invitation I'll probably ever get in my life. I was invited to the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria, which for those of you who don't know, it started in 1947 as a response to the atrocities of World War II. And basically they invite artists and scholars and leading thinkers from around the world for these like 5-day long seminars. Where you live in a castle, like literally they put you up in a castle. If you've ever seen the movie The Sound of Music, the house that was used for the exterior shots, that's the actual castle that this group owns and where we stayed. And I was one of 50 people invited for a session on neuroscience and art. What are the sources of creativity and innovation? And basically it was a bunch of like really famous, cool artists and a bunch of like super famous neuroscientists. And what I call a few normals like me, like academics, authors. And the 50 of us spent 5 days having the most incredible life experience. I mean, if anything in my life were ever going to be a movie, this would be it. It was really like getting the golden ticket or something. And as soon as I left, my husband and I went to Vienna for a little vacation, and I had the idea of writing a novel about interdisciplinary thinking, collaboration, working together across differences, because I had just spent 5 days, day and night, working and partying like till 3 a.m. With a very, very diverse group of thinkers from radically different fields from all over the globe with different perspectives. It was an amazing experience, but we actually did fight like cats and dogs. And we also partied with each other all night, drinking down in the dungeon in the castle, literally. And so that sparked the idea for my novel Spark. And so this was literally 9 years ago this week that I was in Vienna writing the outline for Spark, which my Facebook memory just reminded me. So I wrote the outline and then I stuck it in a drawer for like a year or two until I had time to do it. And that's how that idea came to be. So one of my recent novels, Hollyland, I wrote this during the lockdown. It was a lockdown project. I don't know what your pandemic experience was like, but if it was anything like mine, you know, you were depressed and afraid and double fisting potato chips, and like filled with existential doom, and not leaving your home and having what you consider a normal life. So that was my pandemic experience. And so I turned to writing and I wrote every day. I wrote more during my lockdown period than I had probably in 10 years before that. I have books coming out until 2030 that I worked on. They're like literally that's how long it's going to take to roll them out. Because I had nothing else to do. And for me, creativity has always been like a way not to completely fall into despair. So because I was so depressed, I only wanted to write happy things. And it's so interesting because when people read my books, this is a lot about being an author versus being a writer, so we might get to it later, but people have all different kinds of ideas about you based on what you put out into the world, and often they couldn't be more wrong. And it's completely fine. People can have their assumptions, but usually if I put out a book that people perceive as a happy book, people think, oh, she must be really happy. It's usually the complete opposite. If I put out something super happy, I was probably really depressed. And so I wrote it as like a lifeline to myself. If I put out something that's like more depressed and harsh, it's probably because I was in a really good place. So mentally, I was able to explore something darker. But in any event, during the lockdown, I decided I was writing nothing but romance novels. This was a time when we couldn't be within 6 feet apart, literally without being afraid that we might harm or kill a loved one. And there just, to me, there felt like there was so little affection that all I wanted to do was like write things that were filled with affection and hugging and kissing and love and friendship. So I wrote a bunch of romance novels, and Hollyland was one of them. But the way this actually came to be is that my father, who's elderly, got COVID. And this was way before the vaccine. And he had a bunch of different risks that at that time seemed like a death sentence for an elderly person who got COVID. And I didn't think I was ever going to see him again. And he's my most special person in the world. He and my daughter are my two number one people forever. And I live in Maine and my parents live in Florida. There was no way to get there, and we wouldn't have been allowed to see him anyway because of the COVID restrictions at the time. So I just absolutely thought my father was going to die. So I decided to sit down and write him like a letter where you tell someone what they mean to you. But it turns out I'm not a good letter writer at all, but I do know how to write a novel. So I wrote Hollyland for my father. And it is 100% a love letter to him. It's the main character. It's a love story. And the main character is an arts researcher, and she has a very close relationship with her father, who's 100% inspired by my father. There are pieces of my dad's family history woven throughout the entire novel. Only people in my immediate family would be able to see those because artifice was taken, imagination was used, but they are all there. Those nods are all there. I made the main character an arts researcher because I needed quick inspiration. I thought my dad was dying and I need to write quickly. And I am an arts researcher, so it's something I know. So I drew a lot on arts-based research, basically. And there's a very, very strong narrative in the book about the arts. And ultimately, the book is a celebration of my dad's optimistic attitude, and it's a celebration of the arts and what the arts bring to our lives. And it's interesting because a lot of people have said that it's my most commercial novel, but actually, of all my fiction, it has the most of my research in it. By far, which just goes to show you that you can cleverly weave things from your research, from your personal life, from your imagination together in ways that people don't always know what your intent was. And they might read things differently than how you meant them. And just to like cap off that story, my dad is alive and well. He somehow survived COVID, got it a second time, survived that too. And I did write the book very, very quickly. I had my copy editor edit it super quick because I thought it would be the last thing of mine my dad ever read, and I didn't want it to be crap. And I overnight mailed it to him, and he read it and he absolutely loved it. And he has since then read many other of my books, including some that have not been released yet. And so the final book I just wanted to tell you about The inspiration behind is my current release, the location shoot, which is actually my personal favorite of my books. But this was another lockdown project. And again, I told you, I mean, I was depressed. I wasn't leaving my house, I wasn't having what I consider a normal life. I had just finished writing Hollyland, and Hollyland was an incredible gift because I wrote for so many hours every day because of this fear that I was going to lose my father and I wanted him to read it. That I finished it so quickly that it was completely immersive. And so I wasn't depressed during the pandemic. I wasn't even depressed about my father. I was just completely engaged in the book. But as soon as I was done writing it, I had this feeling of deep dread, like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Like at that point, we were still in lockdown. I still thought my father was going to die. And like all I had was creativity. That was the only thing I felt like I had in my life at that time. And so I sort of panicked, like I need another project, but inspiration doesn't always work that way, that like the day you want to start a project, you have the perfect idea. So I kept sort of just tweaking Hollyland, even though I had already sent it to my dad, like trying to figure out inspiration. And my husband and I were watching a movie one night. During the pandemic, we were doing movie marathons, like all movies set in Boston, or all movies with a certain director, all movies, or, those kinds of things to like pass the time. And at one point, we were going through movies that we had seen on the big screen that we liked, that we wanted to rewatch. And we rewatched the movie American Hustle. And at some point in that movie, there's an Elton John song that comes on, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And when that song came on, I did not see anything else of the movie. I mean, nothing. In my mind, there was this scene playing out where there's this group of people, artists, sitting in an inn, and a beautiful woman walks into the room and she taps someone on the shoulder and they dance to that song. And that's all I saw. But I saw it like for the whole rest of the movie. It was just playing out in my mind, playing out in my mind. So the next morning I got up and I literally just transcribed what I had seen. Like that was the beginning of the location shoot. I just wrote what I saw in my mind's eye. And when I read it back to myself, I realized what I was going to write a novel about. I was going to write a novel about a group that went off to live in isolation together and make a film about the meaning of life. And that's what the location shoot is. So the location shoot is this eccentric filmmaker assembles this diverse, sort of unexpected cast. They all go to live in an inn in Sweden. He invites a close friend of his. She is a philosopher, to spend the summer with them. And she just wants to like freeload off of him for the summer. So she goes to spend the summer with them. A love story ensues between her and one of the actors. But it's also really a story about friendship and about the meaning of life. They spend these 3 months together, and each person there realizes they are at a crossroads in their own life. And after the end of the 3 months in which they develop really intense bonds of friendship and love, they all leave and go back to their own lives. And they reconvene 7 months later on the red carpet in Cannes for the premiere of the film. And you see the impact of those 3 months on each of them. And so I realized in hindsight that I literally wrote a novel about a group of artists exploring the meaning of life because I was in lockdown, desperately missing the artists in my life, and I was filled with existential doom because it seemed like we all might die. So that was the inspiration for that book. And it's definitely my favorite, at least of the ones that are published so far. But I wrote it in 4 weeks. That was it. I mean, it was revised a lot after that, but the first draft. So I share these just as examples for the different ways that your life and your research and your experiences and your mood can spark ideas. And then, of course, the difference between just having inspiration and writing a work of fiction or writing any creative work. It doesn't have to be a novel. It doesn't even have to be fiction. The difference is then being able to translate that. So to recognize the inspiration when you get it and to be able to translate that into a piece of art. So the next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, and I will give you some tips for that at the end when I go through tips, like how do you get from A to B. But the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the difference between being a writer versus being an author. which I think is hugely important and something people don't talk about enough. Really, it's the difference between a calling and a job. It's the difference between a passion and a profession. Being a writer is something you do. It's something you are. It's something you're called to do. It's a purpose. Being an author is a job. And so it's important to understand the distinction and to approach those two things differently. If you want to write fiction or write creatively just for yourself, then that's perfectly fine. And there are plenty of people in the world who do that. But I'm talking to those people who want to publish it and put it out in the world, that there is a distinction to be made between being a writer and being an author. So being a writer requires commitment to a writing discipline. It requires commitment to craft, and it requires understanding and a commitment to the values that you create in the story worlds and characters you put out into the world. Being an author requires an understanding of the publishing industry, and it is an industry. It requires opening yourself up to inevitable critique and rejection. It requires vulnerability and strength to share your words with readers who will all have their own opinions and feelings about them, none of which you can control. It's completely out of your control. So I really do look at my life very, very differently. I look at my work as a writer and I look at my work as an author as two different things that obviously are connected, but they are not the same. And so just to give you an example of what that's like to be an author, I thought I'd go for a little public humiliation and read you some of the book reviews that I've gotten that I've always hoped no one ever saw. And now I'm going to share them. And this is being recorded too. So this is a snippet of a book review from my debut novel, Low Fat Love, which I talked about earlier. But presumably in part because Leavy is a professor of sociology who hasn't spent much time writing fiction, Low Fat Love is an absolutely terrible read. Stilted dialogue, underdeveloped characters, the book commits every literary crime I can think of. That was actually the most favorable part of that review. It went on and got much worse. The reviewer, in this part, she's giving her opinion, but she later went on and made gross factual errors, misrepresenting the race of characters and other things that really impugned my reputation and hurt me deeply. And just so if you're wondering, this is not just a random reader on Goodreads or Amazon. This was a book critic in a national magazine. And that was my debut novel. So, and yes, if you're wondering, of course, I was very upset and I had hurt feelings and I was mortified and embarrassed and all the things that one might feel. And I was also really angry because there were factual misrepresentations in the published review that were very damaging and very counter to who I am and what was in the book. So that troubled me too. That being said, if you're wondering how Low Fat Love ended up doing, the book ended up becoming a bestseller. It was my publisher's best-selling book for 2 years in a row and ultimately of all time. And it changed my life. It's a book that completely changed my life. To this day, there's almost not a week that passes. This is about a dozen years later where I don't get an email about the book. It's been published 4 times just in English. And it's in other languages as well. And most importantly to me, the emails and notes that I got when the book came out and that still trickle in, usually about once a week, a lot of them were from people who were suffering from a severe depression, who were in a domestic violence relationship, who had an eating disorder, all of whom said the book helped them. I had many people who said that they were suicidal or that someone in their life was suicidal until they read the book. So you have to sort of take the totality of what an experience is. But, you know, the experience of that book for me overwhelmingly has been extremely positive. And just to say one thing about the one of many reviewers who bashed the book, that in some respects, she was right. I did commit many literary crimes in the book. So I don't agree with all of her takeaways, and I do think that she misrepresented some things. But she's also right. I was inexperienced and I did commit literary crimes, and I didn't follow the narrative structure you're supposed to, which was intentional. There were other mistakes I made that were not intentional, that I've learned from. So that's just sort of a part of the benefit of hindsight and looking back at the totality of what that experience has been. And in case you're wondering, like, does it get better or whatever, or like when you become more known? Not really. It's like if you choose to be an author, not a writer, but if you choose to be an author, this is just something you have to deal with as a part of that professional choice. So I just want to take Hollyland, one of my most recent novels, and I'm going to read you snippets of 3 reviews from 3 different trades. Okay, so the trade magazines are the most important reviews if you're a fiction author. These are 3 snippets. They're all over the place, as you'll see. First one, the main characters will make readers believe in love. Fans of Colleen Hoover and Tessa Bailey will enjoy Hollyland. The next one, feels forced and it is unconvincing. The next one, written with the kind of eloquence associated with award-winning literary fiction, an impressively poignant, laudably original, and thoroughly entertaining novel, highly recommended. Those 3 very divergent reviews, all about the same book, were from Booklist, Publishers Weekly, and Midwest Book Review. 3 readers, 3 opinions. And that's what you have to understand if you want to be an author, is that every single reader will bring his, her, or their experiences, values, perspectives, preferences to their reading of your work. And so, you just have to accept that that is a part of putting your work out there. And the reason I emphasize it is because I really think it's important. If you want to protect your creativity, you want to protect your mental health, you want to protect your artistry, you want to have longevity and not just put one piece of work out, but be an author for a long period of time or for your lifetime, then these are just things you need to deal with. And I wish people had told me this before Low Fat Love came out, because when that first review I read you came out, which was my first review ever in a national magazine, I was not in a good way after that. And if that came out today, I'd actually be fine, except I'd be pissed about the misrepresentations regarding race. But other than that, I'd be fine because I have tools to deal with it and I have a perspective for dealing with it that I didn't even know to have at that time. So I just wanted to end before we go into Q&A with my tips. So the first one is to write down your ideas. And I really mean this. Any idea you have, whether it's a little or a big idea, you think you'll remember, you won't. And writing your ideas down actually helps you develop them. So the physical act, whether you're typing or handwriting, is important. And when you write down your ideas, mull them over. Mulling is purposeful thinking. Okay, so it means you are actively spending time. It could be while you're doing other things. It could be while you're making dinner. It could be while you're brushing your teeth. It could be while you're lying in bed. You don't have to be sitting in a chair staring at a blank wall. You can be doing other things, but spend time mulling over your ideas. Writing is a lot easier when you have something to say. And the more time you think about things and let them stew and let them unfold in your mind's eye, the easier it will come. So, I mean, some people have said to me, well, how'd you write that book so quickly? Or how'd you write that? I was thinking about it for a long, long time. And even in between writing, I would think. So I would lie in bed at night and a scene would be playing out in my mind. So it doesn't come from nothing. The mulling process is important. The next tip I wanted to offer you is to write stories that hold meaning to you. If you write stories that touch your heart, they will touch other people's too. And I believe this to the core of my soul. And I've always followed my instinct and my own heart, and what's been healing or comforting or helpful to me in some way when I pick sort of the topics for my novels. And that has never served me wrong. I do believe that if something holds meaning for you, you will not be the only one. So don't write something because you think it's a trendy topic, or you think reviewers will like it, or you think readers will like it. That's a fool's errand. You will never get anywhere that way. You'll spend your whole life chasing something that's impossible to attain. Instead, write things that are meaningful to you, that you care about, that you want to put out in the world. And then you have a chance that they will mean something to those people who find your stories. My next piece of advice, which is, it's my number one piece of writing advice for any kind of writing, is to develop a writing discipline. Develop a writing discipline. And I talk to people all the time who say, oh, like, you only need to tell that to people who are in high school or who are undergrads. No, you need to tell people that who are in their 80s. I tell myself this all the time. Every single writer and every single author needs to develop a writing discipline and needs to work on it throughout their entire career. There is nobody that's above it. Nobody. I've published over 40 books and have about 10 more that are already written. I work on this every day. It's nobody's above a writing discipline. So when I say a writing discipline, what does that mean? It means a few things. It means schedule time to write. So it's the same as if you were going to any other job or teaching a class or whatever it might be, any other obligation, you schedule time. I personally am a big believer in having like break times. So like if I usually do like hour writing blocks for myself, but I always have 10-minute breaks. So I really write for like 15 minutes and have 10 minutes. I just think you need a break. I always have like if I'm writing all day, I have a longer break at lunch. Like I build in longer breaks where I'll like watch a TV show, or I'll play with my dog, or I'll take a walk, or I'll do something else. Even if you're only writing for half an hour a day, that's fine, but you schedule it. You schedule it the way that if you had a running partner, a trainer at a gym, a dentist appointment, you'd show up. So a writing discipline, schedule your time, write when it's difficult, not just when it's easy. It's not always great. And I love writing. I love writing so much. It is literally my favorite thing on the planet. And the reason I love it so much is because when inspiration comes and you're able to translate it, and you just are in flow, it is the most magical elixir in the world. I mean, it's like better than any drug. It is just the best elixir. It is just going through you. You forget to eat lunch, and there's the characters saying things that you couldn't have planned, and it's amazing. However, most days are not like that. And the way you get those days is by sitting your butt in the chair on the other days and writing when it's hard. You can't edit a blank page. Okay, so bad writing is better than no writing. To me, there's just writing or there isn't, because there's lots of time to make it better. There's lots of time to polish it. There's lots of time to get feedback. All that can come later. So for your writing discipline, you either put the time in or you don't. No distractions, no scrolling, no phone, none of that distracting stuff. If you want to do that stuff, do it during your breaks. So whether you have half an hour blocks or 15-minute blocks or whatever you do, you can scroll and do all that during your breaks. Even if you are sitting and staring at a blank screen and no words are coming, that is important writing time. And I honestly think that's the difference between me and some of my friends who I know really struggle with writing and they don't understand why. And the difference is because I will sit there even if I only get 5 words out, because I know that discipline is going to have me have days where I get 20 pages down like that. And I just know that's how it works. So you have to have the discipline to write even when it's hard. And I just want to give another tip in that regard. I know a lot of people give themselves like page counts or word counts, like I want to write 500 words today, or I want to write 2,000 words today, or whatever. I do not recommend that. I'm kind of strongly against it. Now, obviously, if you're doing that and it's working for you, great. Different things work for different people. You should do anything that works. Personally, I'm against it. And for me, it would be setting myself up for failure, and I don't want to do that. To me, it's like the person who gets up every morning and goes and weighs themselves, and they look at that number, and that number defines how they feel about themselves that day, versus the person who gets up every day and goes and exercises. And the time they've put into exercising defines how they feel about their progress on their wellness and health journey. It's a very, very different mindset. So attaching, your success writing in any particular day to the number of words or pages you put down, I feel like is very negative. I feel like it's attaching, your health progress to your weight, versus the time in. Because, for example, I could spend after I get off this, my plan is actually to write for the rest of the day. I usually write in the morning, and I didn't because I had this, so I did other things. I'm going to write for the rest of the day. I don't know if I'm going to get down 100 words or I'm going to get down 10,000 words, both of which are completely possible for me. I have no idea, but I do know how many hours I'm going to be sitting and writing, and I do know I will be taking breaks during that time. And my success at the end of the day will not be how many words I have on the page. It will be how much time I devoted to those words. So I really encourage you to think about it that way. It's a way of being gentle to yourself. It's a way of being realistic. It's a way of understanding that not every day is the same. That some days I can't write what I want to write, and I struggle over every word. And the next day I end up deleting it and rewriting. But that is a part of the process. And that gets you the days where it's flowing. Two more pieces of advice before we go to Q&A. Learn about the world of trade publishing. Trade publishing is very, very different than academic publishing. So even if you have experience as an academic author, please don't think that that is going to perfectly translate to the world of trade publishing. And trade publishing is how you reach general readers. So if you want to, which maybe you don't want to do, but for those of you who want to publish fiction or creative nonfiction and you want to reach general readers, trade publishing is the way to do it. And you should have a thoroughly polished and copy edited, professionally copy edited manuscript before you solicit agents or publishers. It's an extremely competitive world. You absolutely only get one shot with each person in that world. You absolutely should not be sending anything out that has not been really polished and professionally copy edited. And in academia, you can get away with sending out things that are not copy edited, they're full of errors. You can do that all the time, and you can get publications. You can have, a good, successful career publishing. You cannot do that in the world of trade. So I just want to alert you to that so that you put your very best foot forward. Because as competitive as it is, what you will also find out is that there are a whole bunch of people that take themselves out of the running right away because they make simple mistakes, such as sending something in that wasn't copy edited. And if you can avoid just those simple mistakes, you're already ahead of the curve. You're already in a better position than many of the other people who are looking for the same slots in publishing that you're looking for. And then my final and absolute number one tip and my number one piece of advice for any kind of writing and publishing you do is to develop a relationship with your work that is not dependent on anything external. And that is absolutely the key to being able to not just be a writer, but to be an author, to put your work out there, to continue to put your work out there, to deal with rejection, to deal with critique, to deal with hurt feelings that you might have over the things people say. The way to do that is to have your own relationship with your writing that isn't dependent on anything else. And I absolutely do that. That is one thing, and there's a lot of things in my life I might not do well, but that is one thing I do well, is that everything I write before it is published, before it is out, I have completely made peace with it. I know what my intention was. I know what my heart was. I know what I was trying to do. And I know how it makes me feel and what it's brought to my life. And I just make peace with it, that other people will have all different kinds of reactions to it. And that is actually really none of my business. That's their business. So that concludes the remarks that I had planned. And I was hoping that we could open it up for discussion and question about anything you might all want to talk about. Oh, I see a hand up. Keith, it's so hard for me without my glasses. Do you want to
Happy to. Let me
Thank
find.
you.
I'm not as well versed on Zoom. It's weird. So we're doing hands here, right?
Yeah, well, somebody just did a hand, but I couldn't see their name without my glasses on, and now their hand is gone.
Yeah,
If you have your hand up, you can put it up again.
And then I'll watch for future hands.
And you can also pop comments or questions into the chat too.
I love that distinction you were making, stressing between academic publishing proper and this publishing and the need for polish. You know, that's a world that I don't know, but it makes perfect sense at one shot, you know?
It's really, I mean, it's a really, really competitive world. I mean, 1 out of like 6,000 people or something gets a literary agent. I mean, it's a really competitive world. And there are publishers you can go to directly without that, but that is also extremely competitive. And so I just know a lot of people it's much more rigorous. And I've done a lot of academic publishing. I love academic publishing. I still do it. It's still a part of my career. But it is a very relaxed world in terms of the publishing industry. It's very, very different than what the trade world is. And so, you know, and it might not be a world you want to enter. And I don't think it's for everybody, but if you want to reach general readers with anything, with memoir writing, I mean, I actually got an email pretty recently from a very, very famous researcher who I'm not going to say their name in this, but you all know this person. And they're very, very famous for their academic work, and they want to do memoir writing and was asking me questions about trade publishing. And they're one of the most successful academic authors, I think, like of all time. But and thus is smart enough to understand that trade publishing is a totally different world.
Hey, Patricia, I see the comments now. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So
why don't I take them one by one? And I also see a hand. So Sakina writes, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Hi, thanks so much for your talk. Could you say a little bit more about how to find an agent or a publisher that is suitable for your work?
Yes. So first of all, I mean, you have to have a finished piece of work in fiction. So it's not a book proposal like in academia. You have to have a complete manuscript. So if you're writing a novel, for example, the novel has to be done and it has to be polished and copy edited. And then if you want to get an agent, that's the primary way that people get a trade publisher. And I will talk about the secondary way, but the primary way that the most effective way is to get a literary agent to represent you in your book. And so to get an agent, you have to write a query letter. It's basically a 1-page letter. This is not a place to be humble. It's basically, you know, you should have, you know, a really exciting paragraph about your book and how fabulous your book is, describing your book, a really fabulous paragraph about yourself. Just take everything that's a highlight of you and put it in that one paragraph. All our lives are very impressive when they're narrowed down to one paragraph. And then some sort of closing paragraph again about the book and how you want them to represent you. This should also be professionally copy edited. You'd be crazy to send a query letter to an agent. You get one shot with each agent. You'd be crazy to send one that was not copy edited. These are not things you can do yourself. Even if you're an English professor, this is not something you should be doing yourself. It is extremely difficult. The average person who gets an agent, it takes, I think, like 6 or 7 years. This is a difficult world. So everything should be polished. If you want instruction on how to write a query letter, there are different ways you can get that. In my book, Writing and Publishing Qualitative Research, I have examples. I have full book proposals, full query letters, all that stuff, because I think people need examples desperately, and they're all annotated to help you write your own. If you get, there's an annual book that comes out of literary agents. You can go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and find it easily. Always get the most recent because there's a lot of turnover in this field. If you get a book like that, which will have all the agents you can pitch, it will also have sample query letters. They always have sample query letters, so you can look at those as additional samples. And then you make a list. You make a list of all the agents. It's probably going to be hundreds that take submissions in your genre. So whatever your genre of fiction is. And then you send your letter and whatever they ask for, and they will all ask for something different. They will ask for 1 page of your manuscript. They will ask for 5 pages of your manuscript. They will ask for 10 pages, and they mean exact. Be precise. Send them exactly what they ask for. Don't think, oh, well, my first chapter is 12 pages. They only asked for 10. No, send them the 10 they asked for. The reason your manuscript has to be fully done is because if they're interested, they're going to want to see the whole thing, and they're going to want to see it immediately. like that day you'll be sending it to them. So that's how you get an agent. There are also some trade publishers that accept unsolicited manuscripts, meaning those that are not represented by an agent. You can do a simple like Google search online and find examples. Those are also competitive. It's all competitive. It's a competitive world, but they do exist. But most trade publishers require an agent.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's self-publishing, hybrid publishing. I mean, there's different forms of publishing, which I actually talk about in the book too, you can look into. But you need a full manuscript and you need a query letter and you need a list of agents.
All right, let me give you a couple more here. They're lining up in chat, which is fun. Winters, I saw your hand and now it's down, but I can come back and check in a second. Either Mavi or Mavi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. Do you feel like, this is in chat, do you feel like limiting oneself to a particular genre can be positive or negative for the professional author?
So I'll tell you the common wisdom and then I'll tell you what I actually think. So the common wisdom is that repetition equals reputation. And that's in academic publishing, it's in fiction, it's in everything. So the common wisdom is that if you're always writing in the same genre, you can become better known in that genre. So 9 out of 10 people you ask will tell you that. I personally don't subscribe to that at all because I've never been interested at face value in what my career looks like. I've been interested in having a life I want to live. And by doing that, I've actually had a much better career than I ever would have expected or planned. That's what's worked for me. So for me, I have always followed my creative instinct, the things that inspire me, the things I'm interested in doing. I mean, most publicists will tell you just always, and agents will tell you just always write in one genre. You become known in that genre. And there is wisdom in that. I mean, a lot of people find success doing that. So I don't want to diminish it. That is not how I operate. But again, it's all life choices. And people will have different things that are important to them. For me, I've loved writing more than anything else since I was 5 years old. Literally. I have books my mother found that I wrote and illustrated and bound with all old wallpaper from when I was 6 are the earliest ones she found. And we don't think they're the first ones. I wanted to do this my whole life. I loved it more than anything. I always have, whether anybody read what I wrote or not, I always loved it. So for me, the most important thing to me is protecting the thing I love, protecting my creativity, protecting that I have this well to go to when times are bad, like in the pandemic. To me, that's the most important thing. And so I write what moves me and what I'm inspired to write. So different approaches. I think it's important to get honest with yourself about what's important to you and then follow that.
Great. Patricia, we're almost at our scheduled time. I don't know if you have an 11 o'clock something, but we could keep this going until about 10:55-ish.
I am absolutely happy to stay as long as you all would like me to.
Let's keep going. And there's an 11 o'clock session here. So that's maybe a minute or two before is where we'll have to stop. Winters, did you want to work your quick question in?
Hey, Patricia, my name's Lisa Winters. I'm also a sociologist. And so I really appreciate your work and this idea of using creative writing to kind of package research and deliver it that way. And so I try to do that in my own writing. And so my question for you is, when I write and I'm trying to incorporate sociology, sometimes I feel like what I'm writing is too on the nose, like it's too direct. Like I'm trying to incorporate research in a way that's too obvious or something. And so I wondered if you struggled with that early on. And if you did, like, do you just work on that in the revisions, or I'm just curious?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you so much for your kind words. I mean, it's always been like a balancing act with me. I mean, it's so funny because when I first started writing novels, I desperately wanted people to see them as research. So I was upset when people didn't see the research in them. Now I want people to see them as literary works. And so it's like completely shifted. But that being said, like I said, Hollyland has more of my research in it for 100% than any other novel I've written, which some people debate me about this stuff, but like I did actually write it. So I do know what I put into the books, and it does have more of my research than my other novels. But I definitely want people to see it as a literary work. So there's this like balancing thing. And I think you get better over time. Like, I don't know if this will help at all, but I've always seen this I've seen it as like sculpture. Like, imagine you have like a lump of clay and you're like molding it into a vase or something. And like every revision is like you're smoothing it a little bit more, you're working it in a little bit more, so that you don't see all the fingerprints on it. And so that when this thing, goes in the kiln and comes out, it looks polished. When you start out with that lump of clay, your fingerprints are all you see. And you shape it and you shape it and you shape it. Then your fingerprints are still there in that final vase and that final sculpture. The whole thing was made with your fingers. It's all there, but it's not up in people's face. And to me, that just is about time and editing and revisions. And I revise things so many times. I mean, most of my novels, I'm sure they've been revised like 100 times or more before they come out, literally like 100 times or more. Where by the end, it's literally just maybe 5 words in the whole 200 pages or whatever are changed, but it makes a difference. But in the beginning, things are moved around, things are taken out, things are rewritten, things are told from someone else's perspective. And so I think when you're trying to find that balance between what you want to say and how you're saying it, you just keep revising and tweaking, and everybody's style is different too. I think it's fine for some things to be more direct and for some things to be more subtle. So I would just try and figure out what voice you're comfortable in writing in.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely. Patricia, there's a comment in asking for the link for the workshop. If you can post that when we're done, that'd be great.
Yeah. Oh, it's right up in the very top of the chat.
Oh, good.
You scroll
Good,
up to the top. So if you scroll up to the top of the chat, there's the link. I do recommend you cut and paste it just because I know people are having problems with Eventbrite. But it starts on Monday. It's 4 sessions. And it's going to be, just so you know what it is, it's going to be like workshop style. So they're 2 hours each. And there's going to be a presentation on the topic of the day. Like, I made a PowerPoint and everything, like a formal presentation. Then there's going to be guided writing time where I will give everyone something to write about. And I will be online writing. We will all be writing together the whole time. And then we're going to come back for discussion. So that's the format. And it's up there in the top, and the new writing and publishing book that does have examples of like query letters and book proposals and all of that. That link is there as well.
Perfect. I would encourage everyone to check out Dr. Leavy on Facebook. She has a massive social presence. You're a part of her life as a writer, including at Barnes & Noble, which is my favorite moment. Lovely, my friend. So maybe I'll just mention these comments, and if there's a comment or two that you want to hit on in our remaining couple minutes, that's up to you. Kind of a lightning round of things. So Nathaniel asks, can you talk a little bit more about self-publishing versus seeking publisher? Thank you. I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you for your kind words. Let me just say right now that the big advantage of self-publishing is that you own the work, which is actually really important for a whole lot of ways, that you own your creative work, you have creative control. If you are going to self-publish, you should hire a professional copy editor, professional typesetter. You should do it at the highest possible level. The downside to self-publishing is that you won't have traditional distribution, which means you cannot get into stores. You have to have a publisher with traditional distribution to get into stores like a Barnes & Noble and those kinds of things. They won't take anything that's POD, print on demand, which all self-publishing basically is. So there's no chain into stores. Now, that being said, there are a lot of authors who have full-time careers selling their stuff just through Amazon, and not even online anywhere else, and make a good living and write lots of books. So it is absolutely possible, but that's the major advantage and the major challenge.
Perfect. And then I did not know that. And then our friend Hamani asks, what are your thoughts about writing for both academic and trade publishers? Is it worth continuing to write for academic presses while seeking an agent trade publisher? And let's make that our last question for the session.
Yeah, I absolutely think I mean, look, it's going to be a question of your time. So I can't divide up the time you have in your life to figure out, but if you have the time, then yes, I think it's worth it. I mean, first of all, you do build an audience. It's easier to get academic publishing, and you can start to build an audience. And I think it's great to share with academics. I mean, I still like my book that came out yesterday is with an academic publisher. There are lots of benefits to academic publishing. So if you have the time, and also, when you send that one-page query letter out, when I tell you that that one paragraph about yourself should be your highlight reel, I really mean it. Like, you have one paragraph and these people are getting thousands and thousands of submissions. You have one paragraph to talk about yourself. So any success you have in any area of publishing or in any other area of your life that's pertinent to your book should be in that paragraph. So, I mean, for me, one of the ways that I've been able to get the publishers that I have in trade is because of the success I've had in academic publishing, and how good you can make that look when you only have to put it in a paragraph. Again, everyone's highlight reel, you can make it look pretty great when you're only talking about a few sentences.
That's lovely. I don't know how you give concluding remarks to a wonderful workshop like this, a 55-minute workshop, but we're just very grateful for Patricia. She is a friend. When she can, she is a quick yes, enthusiastic yes, like this one. And I don't know when you sleep. There's so much that we haven't heard here, right? This is the icing on the cake. So I hope folks will take advantage of the workshop that she mentioned, and Tony reposted the information, and check out her book. And I just taught the other day, by the way, your piece from Tony and Jonathan's book on writing autoethnographic families. Patricia has a great piece in there called Confessions of a Feminist Writer, or Mother, Confessions of a Feminist Mother. Students love it. Love it.
Thank you.
So let us come together and thank our friend, Dr. Patricia Leavy, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you all so much for having me, Tony, Keith. I love you. Thank you for inviting me to be with this wonderful group. And I hope you have an amazing conference. And I will be going off to write.
And there you go. Hope to be able to see you soon. Thank you
Love
again.
you guys. Bye.